I've had chronic GI issues since I was a teenager. Bloating, pain, fatigue, you name it. I spent years bouncing between doctors, specialists, naturopaths, drinking the chalky stuff, getting scanned, scoped, and poked like a human science experiment. After all that, the best answers I got were,
maybe stress?
And
have you tried not eating dairy? What about gluten?
eventually I got tired of being a medical mystery. So my husband and I went back to school, became certified nutritionists, and decided to solve it ourselves. After experimenting with nearly every diet under the sun, I finally found my healing through something surprisingly simple: a whole food plant-based diet. It didn't just help, it changed everything for me, which is why I picked up Diet Cults by Matt Fitzgerald with a lot of curiosity and a little skepticism. I wanted to know, would this book challenge the rigid, dogmatic parts of wellness culture, or would it just roll its eyes at people like me who found a real healing through food choices? Spoiler, it does both. As a certified nutritionist with a background in holistic education, and as someone who has lived through both the pain and promise of food, I have a lot of thoughts about this one. Some parts I loved, others made me cringe. So here is my honest deep dive. At its core, Diet Cults argues that most popular diets today function less like nutrition plans and more like belief systems. Whether it's paleo, vegan, keto, or carnivore, Fitzgerald sees these food tribes as modern religions, complete with sacred texts, prophets, and purity rituals, aka cookbooks, influencers, and clean eating, as well as a clear sense of moral hierarchy. And he's not just making a cute metaphor. He draws on anthropology to show how humans have always used food as a way to define culture, identity, and belonging. In small-scale societies, dietary rules often served as social glue. We eat this, not that, was just as much about community as it was health. That tribal instinct still shows up in wellness culture today. One of Fitzgerald's most compelling arguments is how diet communities foster an us versus them mindset. Once someone adopts a particular food philosophy, it's easy to start judging those who eat differently, assuming they're either uninformed or morally off track. He's right. I've seen people cling to a diet long after it stops working just to avoid losing their identity or social circle. That's not wellness, it's ideology. And I felt that dynamic from the other side too. Because of my gut issues, I sometimes go out to dinner and don't order anything, or I'll bring my own food to keep my body happy. I'm totally comfortable with that now, but it definitely makes other people squirm. There's this awkward tension in the air, like my plate is a silent protest. Then come the questions.
Where do you get your protein? What about your calcium? You mean you don't eat any fish? Not even extra virgin olive oil?
And I get it, they're usually coming from a place of curiosity or concern, but it still shows how deeply we're wired to believe that food uniformity equals social harmony. When someone deviates, it can feel threatening, even if that someone is just trying to keep their digestive system from staging a revolt. But it goes both ways. I've seen plant-based eaters act like missionaries. Keto fans quote their macros like scripture, and raw food devotees treat blenders like holy relics.
I've even been told, dead serious, that my plant-based eating was demonic.
Yes, really. When our food choices become tied to our moral identity, it's easy to feel personally attacked when someone else eats differently. That's what Fitzgerald is getting at. We're not just choosing what to eat, we're choosing who we are and what tribe we want to belong to. And I genuinely appreciate that Fitzgerald calls out this silent reality. He puts words to something I've felt for years. Food has become a stand-in for identity, morality, and belonging, and it shouldn't be. At its core, food is nourishment. It's biology. It's fuel for our bodies, not just a litmus test for virtue. And I agree with Fitzgerald here. This pressure to moralize meals does more harm than good. But Fitzgerald doesn't just call out the social dynamics, he also takes a flamethrower to the so-called science behind many of today's hottest diets. Paleo, raw, gluten-free, blood-type diets, macro ratios, you name it, he probably poked some holes in it. And to be honest, some of it is very needed. I appreciate how he challenges us to think critically instead of blindly accepting whatever plan is trending this month. But, and this is a big but, some of his debunking rests on shaky ground. As a librarian, teacher, and certified nutritionist, I know how to trace a source, and I nearly fainted when I found a footnote citing Wikipedia.
Wikipedia! Y'all, my 5th graders know not to do that.
For a book taking aim at pseudoscience, I expected a little more rigor. Some of his sources are solid, but other times it feels like he's cherry-picking just to win an argument. And that weakens his point, even when he's right. Now, one of the biggest things I appreciated about diet cults was how clearly Fitzgerald exposes the tribalism baked into so many modern eating plans. He points out how easy it is for people to tie their identity to a diet. And once that happens, it becomes less about food and more about belonging. I've seen this play out in real life. People will stay on a plan that's clearly not working anymore simply because it's what their community does. And I've sat at enough dinner tables to know how uncomfortable folks can get when someone dares to eat differently. Fitzgerald's take on this felt refreshingly honest and long overdue. I also loved his push for flexibility over rigid rules. He makes a strong case that long-term success with food comes not from perfect discipline, but from being adaptable. That lines up exactly with what I've studied through my degree in holistic education and a certification as a nutritionist. The people who thrive aren't the ones who follow a plan to the letter. They're the ones who listen to their bodies, make small tweaks over time, and stay consistent without being extreme. Another huge win is his reminder that nutrition isn't morality. We've loaded so much guilt and virtue into the way we talk about food,
Clean eating, cheating, being good or bad.
and it was refreshing to hear him name that dynamic so clearly. Food should be nourishment, not a spiritual report card. Fitzgerald also does a great job identifying what the most successful eating patterns have in common, regardless of their label. Things like emphasizing whole foods, cultivating self-awareness, and sticking with it over time. That's the stuff that actually moves the needle. Then there's Fitzgerald's critique of the paleo diet, which I found both fascinating and a bit necessary. Now, I am not anti-paleo, but I do think we need to be more honest about where its historical claims fall short. Fitzgerald points out that many paleo enthusiasts eat foods from all over the world, things ancient humans would have never encountered. For example, today's paleo eaters might be enjoying tropical fruits like mangoes from Southeast Asia or guava from Central America, alongside foods like quinoa from the Andes or even coconut oil from the Pacific Islands. These foods are often marketed as paleo approved, yet they come from completely different regions of the world, regions where early humans had no access. While these foods may be nutrient dense and healthy, they weren't available to the hunter-gatherers who roamed the plains of Africa or Europe. So while they may fit the modern paleo framework, they don't exactly align with the idea of eating exactly the way our ancestors did. Even more compelling, Fitzgerald introduces archaeological research showing starch granules in fossilized dental plaque, proof that early humans ate far more variety, including plenty of plants and carbs, than the modern paleo narrative might suggest. In fact, many ancient populations were largely plant-based, consuming tubers, wild grains, and other starch-rich foods. This directly contradicts the heavy meat focus we often associate with paleo diets today. It's a truth often overlooked by the modern paleo community, and it's the kind of science-backed challenge we need more of in the nutrition world. While Fitzgerald has some valuable insights, there are several areas that left me feeling uneasy. Let's dive into some of the key points where the book falls short. One of the biggest issues with diet cults is the oversimplified portrayal of what constitutes the best diet or exercise plan. The term best is completely subjective, and Fitzgerald never clearly defines what outcome we're actually aiming for. Is this about looking great in a bikini for the summer, feeling energized throughout the day, preventing disease, living to 100? Without clearly specifying what success actually looks like, longevity, mental health, muscle mass, fat loss, disease prevention, etc., whatever your terms are, his claims come off vague and ungrounded. It feels like the reader is being told,
Don't follow cult-like thinking.
while also not being given a clear, superior alternative. This lack of clarity leaves readers wondering, what exactly is the goal? He also misses an important distinction between different goals. A raw vegan diet and carnivore diet serve wildly different purposes and demographics, yet both are touted as best in certain circles.
Well, which is it?
That depends on what you're aiming for. If you're trying to reduce inflammation or reverse heart disease, you may need a very different approach than someone who just wants to bulk up or compete in powerlifting competitions. For example, in regions known for longevity, like the blue zones, people eat primarily plant-based diets. The goal there isn't to shed body fat or hit a new bench press PR. It's to live longer, healthier lives, often well into their 90s with low rates of chronic disease.
By the way, I recently filmed a video on the blue zones that dives into how these people in these regions maintain their health. So you can check that out in the link below if you're interested.
Fitzgerald doesn't seem to fully acknowledge these nuanced goals when lumping all diet tribes into one big pile. Related to this, weight loss is often treated like the gold standard of health, but that can be misleading. What about energy, strength, mood? A lot of the popular best diets zero in on the number on this scale because it's easy to track. But that doesn't mean it's the most meaningful or even accurate measure of health. Let's say you drop 10 pounds. That might feel like a win, but if your energy tanks, your mental health declines, or you're losing muscle mass in the process, is it really a step toward better health? True wellness is about feeling strong, focused, and functional, not just lighter. And then there's visceral fat, the kind that wraps around your organs. It's invisible, but dangerous. You can be skinny and still have high levels of this fat, which is linked to heart disease, diabetes, and more. If you're losing weight but not addressing metabolic health, you're missing the bigger picture. I was also a bit put off by the way Fitzgerald labels pretty much any group with shared habits, beliefs, or preferences as a cult. By his logic, nearly everyone on Earth belongs to at least one. Most of us, several.
Do you like CrossFit? Cult. Do you go to a running group or spin class? Cult. Are you in a weight loss support group? Definitely a cult. Do you follow any kind of diet? Cult. By Fitzgerald standards, it seems like if you've ever attended a sporting event, religious service, or joined a book club, I regret to inform you, my friend, but you are in a cult.
I found his terminology really off-putting because it minimizes the severity and psychological manipulation of actual cults. And the ironic part? He ends up preaching what he calls agnostic healthy eating, with guidelines that aren't all that different from the very cult he critiques. He says it's different because he doesn't claim this is the only path to health, but by his own definition, it still feels like a tribe with its own doctrine. Now, I'm not saying he's wrong about everything, and I get it. He did this to sell books. He even flat out admits that no one wants to read a book about eating a balanced diet in moderation because it's not sexy enough. The only reason he uses such inflammatory language is to get attention. And it worked, so kudos to him for the good marketing. But let's not pretend it wasn't a bit manipulative and contradictory. Okay, next up, let's talk about tone, because Fitzgerald comes across as dismissive in several spots, especially when it comes to food sensitivities. Take his view on gluten. Fitzgerald essentially says that though humans have eaten bread for thousands of years, for the most part, gluten intolerance didn't exist before the 1990s. Celiac disease was rare, and non-celiac gluten sensitivity was virtually unheard of. Okay, cool. I have no problem with that. But then he goes on to say that most modern cases of gluten sensitivity are likely the result of something other than gluten. Or worse, that it's all in people's heads. He points to studies showing that placebo treatments can relieve symptoms and strongly implies that gluten sensitivity is
purely psychological.
I mean, come on. I get that there are other factors at play and that gluten might not always be the villain, but there are certain people who should not be eating gluten. As a nutritionist, I don't think everyone needs to avoid it, and I'm not anti-bread, but if gluten makes you hurt, don't eat it. It really is that simple. And to suggest that people's pain is essentially a placebo-only response feels not only oversimplified, but borderline insulting. Even if mindset plays some role in symptoms, that doesn't invalidate the very real discomfort many people experience on a daily basis. Food isn't just fuel, it's tied to culture, memory, biology, trauma, and health. You can't reduce it to a science experiment and expect people to feel seen or supported. His tone on this, and a few other sensitive topics, felt a little too smug and not nearly compassionate enough for my taste. Simplicity is helpful, but empathy is essential, and this book could have used a lot more of it. Another surprising gap in Fitzgerald's book is the lack of any chapter or serious discussion addressing vegetarian or diversified plant diets. But he doesn't entirely ignore the concept either, making it clear he believes humans need to eat meat. Fitzgerald offers the rationale that humans have always eaten meat, but that argument falls flat for me.
Humans have done a lot of things throughout history. That doesn't automatically make all of them optimal for health or longevity. I could name several examples, but we just won't go there.
What's more, his stance isn't backed by any compelling data or modern nutritional science. It's more of a blanket assumption than evidence-based conclusion. Meanwhile, there's a plethora of peer-reviewed research pointing to the health benefits of plant-based diets. From Dr. Michael Greger's work on dietary diseases of excess to Dr. Colin T. Campbell's decades-long research culminating in the China study to Dan Buter's work with National Geographic studying the longest-lived populations in the world through the Blue Zones Project, there's significant credible evidence that plant-based eating can lead to positive health outcomes. Even among groups that consume organic or pasture-raised meat, studies have found links between meat consumption and chronic disease. So, if we're going to talk about optimum health, we need to engage with all the data, not just the parts that support a meat-centric view. A more balanced approach would have gone a long way here. Now, I am not anti-meat. I am pro-data, and science supports that we can live healthy, long lives with a focus on plants, which is something Fitzgerald's book doesn't address as thoroughly as it could. Going down that rabbit trail, we can even look to history for compelling examples. Take the mummified remains of ancient Egyptians. Despite having access to what we would consider natural and organic free-range meats, many of them showed signs of chronic diseases, like heart disease and obesity. Their diets included a significant amount of animal products, and yet their health outcomes challenge the idea that meat, even in its natural form, is inherently beneficial, simply because it's historical. The Maasai people are another group often referenced to support meat-based diets. I've actually had the privilege of visiting the Maasai people in Tanzania and saw firsthand how active and traditional their lifestyle is. Walking long distances, herding cattle, and relying heavily on meat, blood, and milk for sustenance. But even with all of that movement and minimal exposure to processed foods, research, including work by Dr. Garth Davis, shows they still have high instances of atherosclerosis, the buildup of plaque in the arteries that can lead to heart disease. It's a reminder that natural doesn't always mean optimal, and that even ancestral-style diets can carry risks.
Yes, organic and free-range meats are better than factory-farmed alternatives, but better doesn't always mean optimal.
Studies have consistently shown that populations with lower meat intake across the board, especially processed and red meat, tend to live longer and suffer less from lifestyle-related diseases. It's not about vilifying animal products. I am not saying that everyone needs to go vegan. I'm just saying we should zoom out and consider the whole picture. Okay, this one isn't necessarily a negative, but I found it incredibly interesting that Fitzgerald blends biblical principles with evolutionary science. Not that they can't work in tandem, I actually think they can, but he keeps them pretty disjointed. My best guess is that he's trying to appeal to a wide range of readers, from those with strong faith backgrounds to those more interested in evolutionary theory. He also references his wife's faith, which seems to influence parts of his writing and adds another layer to his approach. As a believer, I understand the desire to bring together different perspectives. I just found it a bit jarring the way it was presented. Both viewpoints show up throughout the book, but they aren't woven together very smoothly. Or at all, actually. It felt a little haphazard, like switching back and forth between two stations on the radio without fully tuning into either. This intrigued me so much that I actually went on a little mission to find out what Fitzgerald personally believes. Not because I need to agree with him, but because understanding an author's worldview helps me better interpret their message. Unfortunately, it came up short and wasn't able to find that information. So, Mr. Fitzgerald, if you ever watch this, please let me know. What do you actually believe personally? Also, and I know this is a minor, probably even moot point altogether, but Fitzgerald claims that humans have always eaten meat. However, if you take a literal view of Genesis, like he does in other parts of the book, that's not accurate from that worldview. According to Genesis 9:3 and 4, God doesn't give humanity permission to eat meat until after the Noahic flood, which postdates the young earth view of creation by over 1,000 years. Now, this isn't a big deal, and honestly, it really doesn't matter at all. But it's an example of how inconsistencies can sneak in when sources aren't aligned. Another odd inconsistency? Fitzgerald introduces something he calls the agnostic healthy eating game, a point-based system where foods earn values based on their nutritional quality, and you aim to hit certain totals across different categories each day. On the surface, I don't have a problem with this game. It's a creative attempt to add structure without strict rules or food shaming. Great. But here's the thing. It looks a lot like Weight Watchers, right down to the scoring. The irony is that Fitzgerald harshly criticizes Weight Watchers earlier in the book for reducing food to numbers. His version might have a looser philosophy, but let's be honest, it's still a points game, just dressed up in a different outfit. What makes it more confusing is the example he shares of his own weekly meals. Now, I genuinely appreciated the transparency here because it's pretty vulnerable to share your weekly meals in a book. But the final score he gave himself was a bit convenient. You see, he's careful to tally points for most meals until dessert rolls around. His nightly chocolate and beer, no points, no mention. Now, I'm not judging the treats, but if you're going to make a case for a system, consistency does matter. Ultimately, holistic nutrition is about more than macronutrients. It's also about culture, personal preference, healing, and recognizing that food plays a deeply emotional and spiritual role in people's lives. I would have loved to see Fitzgerald approach this topic with a little more compassion and nuance, making space for a wide variety of reasons people choose to eat the way they do, whether that's for health, tradition, personal ethics, or even cultural identity. Fitzgerald's book brings a valuable perspective to the table, but I think it misses the mark in a few key areas. If we're going to truly pursue health, we need to engage with the full complexity of the human experience and bring more empathy, curiosity, and humanity into our conversations around food and wellness. When it comes down to it, food should be about feeling good, not feeling guilty. We don't need to stress about perfection or follow the latest trend. What matters is finding what works for you. Bio-individuality matters. What works for one person might not work for someone else, and that's totally fine. We all have different bodies, preferences, and needs. The best approach is to focus on real, whole foods and eat in a way that supports your health and energy. Science is real. We do know certain things, like eating more plants and whole foods are backed by research. But there's no one size fits all. The goal isn't to follow a rigid diet, it's about listening to your body and making decisions that work for you long term. You have permission to eat in a way that nourishes you, mind, body, and spirit. No labels required, no cult necessary. If you're feeling lost in all the diet talk, here's a quick checklist to help. These are 3 questions you can ask before you join a diet tribe. Does this make me feel anxious or empowered? Do I feel shame when I don't follow it perfectly? Does it help me listen to my body or ignore it? Love it or hate it, diet cult raises an important question. Why do we hold so tightly to food rules? And what are we trying to become by following them? If this book challenged you like it did me, I would love to hear your thoughts. Let's keep the conversation going in the comments. And as always, the book is linked below if you'd like to check it out for yourself. That's all for now. Take care, stay curious, and I'll see you next time.